Look at the TV show Andor, there are people out there who are saying like this show isn't really Star Wars. They're basically saying, "Oh, the show actually isn't canon. It's its own thing. It's set in its own continuity because there's not enough connection there to the rest of Star Wars." I don't personally agree with that. Basically, what you're seeing here is there are people who think that because we don't see a single lightsaber in this show, because the Force doesn't show up, isn't mentioned even once, because we hardly anyway, see some of the iconic Star Wars vehicles of TIE fighters, Star Destroyers, X-Wings, or Stormtroopers. We don't see Jedi or Sith at all. We have some characters from the rest of the franchise in here, but not a ton of them. For all these reasons, there are people who think that the show isn't really Star Wars, or it shouldn't be considered part of Star Wars because it doesn't fit in there, or it's too disconnected from the rest of the franchise. I don't agree with that. I don't agree with this idea that because this show is not as flashy as the rest of Star Wars, doesn't pop in the same way, doesn't have the iconic, superficial elements in there, that means it's not really Star Wars. No, I wouldn't say that. Not just because you have a few characters from the rest of the franchise in here, Cassian Andor, Mon Mothma, Saw Gerrera, then the most minor of them would be Muscat Raushi, who showed up in Rogue One, but his name, as far as I remember, wasn't even mentioned in the movie. He barely has any screen time. He's just one of the rebels that goes to Scarif, so pretty minor character. Aside from that, though, we see the Imperial Senate in this show. We see Coruscant. Palpatine is mentioned. Some of the planets from the rest of the franchise are mentioned. Also, Wolf Yularen shows up in this show in a way that makes complete sense. Also, you do see a Star Destroyer at least once. You do see a TIE Fighter, an X-Wing at least once. You see Stormtroopers at least once. Plus, you have those Army troopers that we saw in Solo, a Star Wars story. And you have the ISB in here, which was established before Andor, though it wasn't really explored much. You had one ISB agent in Rebels, that being Agent Callus, and it had showed up in some other books, comics, but the organization wasn't really fleshed out much until Andor came out and it really started to explore the ISB and show you how it really works. I think that it's totally fine if you're making a TV show, it's part of a franchise, to have it feel different from the rest of the movies or shows, to have the tone be different, or make it not quite as flashy as the other stuff, not have the iconic superficial elements in there, as long as there's still some connection to the rest of the franchise. I mean, when I compare Andor to the Netflix Marvel television shows, there's a very clear difference for me. I mean, with the Netflix Marvel television shows, on paper, they're quote unquote in the MCU, but there's basically no connection between those shows and the rest of the franchise. I mean, the most you get is some pretty minor references to the Battle of New York in Daredevil, just subtle little things like that to make it seem like, oh, this TV show is part of the MCU. But aside from that, there's no connection there. And yeah, I know that Daredevil has actually shown up in Marvel Studios movies or TV shows, but none of the events from the Daredevil Netflix show have actually been referenced in the rest of the MCU yet. We're going to get Daredevil Born Again. It looks more and more like that is actually going to be season 4 of the Netflix show. If that's the case, then things will change a bit. But for right now, there's like no connection between Daredevil and the rest of the MCU. It's so different. Whereas with Andor, as much as there are differences in there, it also clearly is a part of Star Wars. So that's the difference, I would say.